Okay, so this morning's session, Supervisor Training, Scheduling for Supervisors. We're going to be taking a look at supervisor functions on the web portal. As you see here, we have our login screen set up here. I'm going to log in using some credentials I set up for a supervisor. Oops. There we go. So the first set of items we're going to look at this morning is our view schedule options. So what different ways can I view the schedule from the web? First one we're going to look at is the daily schedule. The daily schedule is set up to have up to 6 blocks per page, with each block representing a different shift for your department. In this case here, we have patrol day, patrol night, detective, PD administration, and records. Within each block, we have a list of names of people that are scheduled to be working that day. To the left of their name is their title, and to the left of that is a space that would show any job that they had been assigned for that day. To the right, we have a section for details, and this can show a number of different items. If somebody had their start and end time adjusted from the regular shift times, you'd be able to see that there, like you see here. If somebody had been assigned to a schedule detail, schedule details are items that you can create in the system and assign to people either on a day-to-day basis or a longer period of time, weekly, monthly. These items, which usually include things like maybe cars, radios, tasers, and so on, they would all be listed to the right of the employee's name in the details section. As would any comments that might be added to the schedule. We'll see later on how, as a supervisor, you can add a comment to the schedule to appear to the right of someone's name. And finally, if somebody is on a day off or an overtime that day, their name will be highlighted in the color, and you will have over to the right here a little code indicating whether they're on vacation, sick, comp, or if it's overtime, maybe it's staffing shortage or late call or things along those lines. So the details area can hold a number of different pieces of information. Up at the top here, we have the current day that you're viewing, which by default would be today's date. We have some buttons over here that'll let you go to the next day or the previous day, and ahead a week and back a week. And if I click the calendar button, I will get a drop-down calendar that I can use to choose a date, and the schedule will jump right to that day. Over here in the middle, we have a drop-down that would allow you to choose different profiles that might be created for your department. So if you had multiple shifts, you might break them up into different views. There might be a patrol view and a communications view and an administration view. So you'd be able to see those here and choose to look at other views if you wanted to. And over here we have some buttons where if your view had multiple pages, so maybe we had some more shifts and we had to put them on a second page, you can hit the arrow here to turn the page and see those shifts. This arrow would let you go back a page, and home would always bring you back to the home page, the first page of that profile. We have some check boxes here. If somebody's on a day off or has a day off in the system, we can choose to show the time that they're going to be working that day, if it's a partial day off, or show the times that they're going to be off. For example, if I put that there, that will add the hours that this person is looking to take off. And then here we have a validate button. If your department has set up staffing rules, minimum staffing or validation rules in the system, you can click this button and the system will check for all the shifts here to see if they are above or below minimum staffing. And if a shift fails validation, if it's below minimum staffing, it will change to whatever color was chosen by your department to represent a short shift. Okay. So that is our daily schedule view. We also have a weekly schedule view. And our weekly schedule view is set up to show by group. So whatever group I am a part of, that's going to be the first group that loads up. So in this case here, we see that I am part of group or squad C. So everybody who's part of squad C loads up here on the left. And to the right, I can see for the week what people are working, when they're off, and when they are working, what shift are they working. This view here will start to populate with our time off entries as well as they begin to be added into the system. Now, by default, we're going to load up to the group that I'm a part of, but it is possible for me to use the drop-down that we see right here to choose to view a different group. So if I want to look at Squad B, I choose Squad B, and then I can see their schedule for the week. And the week that I'm viewing is whatever week contains this date right here. So if I want to look at next week, I just pick any day next week, and then I'll see the schedule for that week. So that's our weekly schedule. We also have a monthly schedule, which works the same way. So again, set up by group. Defaults to my group first. And we see the schedule for that group for the whole month. We have a little bit less room here. So we use single letter abbreviations to indicate the shift. We can also see when people are not working. And this will also begin to show time off entries as they're entered into the system. So those first three views, they show us a number of people at one time. But we also have a couple of views where we only show one person at a time. The first one would be the monthly calendar. So this is going to be a calendar for 1 month that shows one person at a time. Okay, so here's the date that I'm currently viewing, and I can see what days I'm working, what days I'm off. My time off and my overtime entries will start to populate this view using the color code that we see at the bottom. Up here I have arrows where I can go ahead a month or back a month. And this button here will always bring me back to the current month. And I can also use this drop down to select the month that I want to view and go directly to that month. And then finally, we have the yearly calendar. Again, yearly calendar only shows me one person, in this case, my calendar for the year. And I can see when I'm scheduled to work, when I'm off, and I will be able to start to see time off and overtime entries populate here using the color code at the top. Okay, so those are the different schedule views that you will be able to access from here. Does anybody have any questions on those? Okay. All right, so we'll start to move on to our next topic here. We're going to start looking at the different actions that a supervisor can take. And most of those items are going to be found in one of two places, either under the supervisor menu. You'll see a handful of supervisor type screens listed here. And the other items will come from the daily schedule, from a set of options that we get when we click on someone's name on that schedule. We get a handful of items here. We call these schedule actions. Again, they're items that populate based on where we clicked on the daily schedule. So the first item that I'll talk about is how do we assign people to jobs and schedule details to indicate what they're going to be doing and using for different days that they work. To do that, we're going to go under the supervisor menu. And we're going to go here to update schedule details. Okay, this screen lets me see for a person at a time their schedule for a month at a time. So in this case, we load up to July. And we're going to default here to jobs. And here we'll see a list of all the jobs that we have in the system. So once I've selected my employee, I can, from this area here, grab the job and I can drag it over to the day that I want to assign it. Okay, and I can do that for as many days out as I want. I can do it for the rest of the month, and then I can even move to the next month if I wanted to. Now, after I've assigned the employee to different jobs, I may want to assign them to other schedule details. So I can go up here to type, and I can choose something else. Maybe I want to now start assigning the employee to different cars. So I can start dragging those over to the schedule. And the same goes for any other schedule details that you might be using. Okay, you got a question coming in? Yes, go ahead, Greg.
So I'm dragging it over and dropping it, and nothing's happening.
You're dragging it over to the orange-colored boxes, or kind of peach-colored box?
I don't have any colored boxes on. Does that mean they don't have them on the schedule or something?
Yeah, so the white boxes are days that the person is not scheduled for. So if it's coming up white, it might mean that person is not scheduled for that day. And potentially, if you're logged in as the sec admin, this might be defaulting to like a generic admin user just to get you in. So you may be better off choosing another employee.
I chose another employee just so I could see if there's any of those boxes lit up, and they didn't. So I must have something set wrong.
Okay. You may, after you choose the employee, you may need to adjust the months, like maybe go to August and then back to July just to get it to refresh the information there. If it still doesn't show anything up, then yeah, we probably need to just verify that your schedules were assigned in the month of July. So if I choose somebody else here, I think in order to give it a refresh, I need to maybe select another job type or another type of item, or switch the day, you know, jump to August and then maybe back to July, something like that, just to give it a refresh there.
Did that work?
That worked? Okay, great. Okay, so I can go ahead and I can go through different people, assign them to their jobs and other items, and again, I can do it for as far out as I need to. When I assign these items to people, if I go back and I check our daily schedule, we'll see those items start to populate on the shift. So the job assignment over on the left, and then any schedule details that I added would appear over on the right-hand side. Okay. So that's how you can go ahead and assign employees to job assignments or other schedule details. Any other questions about that screen? Okay. The next item we're going to talk about is adjusting people's start and end times. So there may be times where certain employees in your department work hours that are maybe different from the regular start and end times of a shift. Whether it be because somebody's going to be a late car or an early car on a patrol shift, or maybe you have an admin shift where you have some people that come in at 8, some people come in at 8:30, and some people come in at 9. Instead of having 3 different shifts for administration, you can place them all on the same shift, and you can adjust their hours and have it display next to their name. There's 2 ways that we can do this. If we just want to do it for a single day, then it's very easy to go in and click on someone's name and choose change schedule times from the schedule actions menu. That's going to give me a list of everybody who's working that day on that shift. And it will allow me to go in and adjust their start and end times by clicking in this area here. So maybe instead of coming in at the regular start time of 7 o'clock, or 1900, this supervisor is going to come in at 1830 and is going to leave, instead of at 0700, is going to leave at 0630. So I can enter that in there and I can hit save. You'll notice when we click on a shift, it kind of zooms into a single shift view. I can always go back to the daily schedule by clicking this button here. And now we see next to this person's name, we have the hours of 1830 to 0630. So again, that's a great way to assign or change start and end times for an employee for a single day. If this is a more long-term change, maybe they're going to work these separate hours or different hours for the next week or month or the rest of the year. Well, instead of having to go day by day and do this, we have a tool you can use under the Supervisor menu. And it's called Change Schedule Times. And this lets us go in and select our date range. So we could say it's from today. Maybe it's through the end of September. And then you can choose what employees this pertains to. I can find their name here. And I can use the arrow to move their name from here over to the selected column. Next, I have the option to select to only change their start and end times on certain shifts. So this might come into play for a department that maybe the employees rotate between days and nights. So I'm going to adjust their day hours, so I would say only make the adjustment if they're on the day shift, or only make the adjustment if they're on the night shift. Could also come into play if we were dealing with detectives, and maybe they have an on-call shift. So maybe we only want to change their hours on their regular detective bureau shift and not touch their on-call shift. But if the employee always works the same shift, or if you want to change the start and end times regardless of what shift they're assigned to, we do have an option right here for all shifts. So then we would enter the time. And then we can choose to have this apply to just specific days of the week if we like. So if your department has some employees that maybe get out early on Fridays in the summer or something like that, you could say this only applies to Fridays, don't touch any of the other days of the week. Or if it's all of them, I can select them all. Okay. And then we would go ahead and click our refresh button, and that will go through each entry that it finds for that employee on the schedule, and it will update their entries with those times. Okay, so that is a way to change employees' times for a period of time without going day to day. Does anybody have any questions on either of those screens? Changing times for one day and shift, or changing times for a date range? Okay. Okay, so moving on to our next topic, we're going to talk about time off entries. Okay, so there's a couple of different scenarios where a supervisor might have to deal with a time off item. So maybe the first scenario would be that I'm the supervisor for today's day shift, and maybe I receive a call from somebody who's supposed to be coming in the next shift saying that they are unable to come in, they're sick, or whatever the case may be. Okay, when I take that call, I can find the person's name on the schedule and I can click on them. And I will get an option over here in our sidebar for request time off. And this will let me enter a time off entry. And it will give me the opportunity to select the status. So I don't have to make it a request. I can put it in as approved if it's a scenario where we want to go directly to the approved step. Okay, so small form to fill out here, pretty simple. Employee's name is up at the top. The date is already in here. The shift is already in here. We can identify if they're going to take off the entire day or if they're going to take a partial day. If they're just going to they're going to come in a little bit late maybe. You would say first part of day, and then you could adjust their start and end time. Then we have reason. What type of time are they going to use? If they're calling out sick, we can select sick. There's a note here that unpaid lunch will be deducted if there are any employees in your department that have an unpaid lunch entered into their pay info screen. Then this little note will remind you that it will deduct that amount of time from the amount of time that it creates an entry for. So in other words, if I had an administrator that was scheduled for 8.5 hours with a half-hour unpaid lunch, it would deduct that half hour and only charge them 8 hours from their bank. And again, because I'm a supervisor, I can bypass the request phase and go right to approve. There's a spot here where I can add comments if I need to. It's not a required field, which is why it's not in red. But I can say, maybe a note about why they're sick or anything along those lines. And if I leave this box here checked, then it will automatically send an email to whoever the default recipients are for an approved day off from someone in this person's group. So usually the person themselves gets a copy. Maybe sometimes we notify 1 or 2 other people as well. After we've entered those items, we hit save. And that's going to place that on the schedule. So we'll see their name will be highlighted in whatever color was chosen for the approved sick day, in this case green, and it will say sick next to their name so you know it is a sick day. Okay, so that's how you would enter a day off for someone who maybe can't submit a request for themselves. A last-minute sick call, or somebody's injured and can't get to their computer to submit a slip. As a supervisor, you also might use the same procedure to put in a request for your own time off. If you want to take a day off, you can go onto the web and submit the same form. The only difference would be you would not perhaps make it approved. You might just make it requested and have someone else approve it. Okay. Now, the other scenario that you could have would be a situation where the employee did put in the request, like we see here. And now you want to go in and approve that day off. Well, I can go right to the schedule and I can click on the day off entry. And when I click on a day off entry, I will get an option over here for change time off. And this brings up that same screen, except that everything's already filled out based on what the user entered. And all I have to do is select whether I want to approve with stipulation, or deny. So if I'm going to approve it, I go ahead and I mark that. Once again, a spot for comments. Either I can add to, or if the employee already put something, I can add to the comments, or I can just enter my own comments. And again, leaving this checkbox checked will send email to whoever has been set up to receive it as a default. And most places set it up to at least go to the employee themselves to let them know that their day off was approved. So then I can go ahead and I can click Save. And that will update that entry. And it will email the employee letting them know that they have an approved day off now. So that's probably the most popular way to approve a day off, is to go to it, look at what else is going on that day. Do we have enough people? And then make the decision if you're going to approve it or deny it. There is one other tool available to you for time off. It's found in the Supervisor menu. And it's called Manage Time Off. And this screen will let us do a search. We can set a date range here. We can narrow our search down based on a certain employee or reason or group. And we can also narrow it down by status. Let me just see all the requests that are out there for time off. Now, I don't have any results here. If I do requests, if I switch to all, I might get a few. So this will let me see all the day off entries that meet these requirements here. I can see the employee's name, the date, the shift, the reason, part of day, start and end time, number of hours, balance. And from here, I can go down the list and I can change the status one at a time. So if I had 5 requests here, I could go down and approve them all by using the drop down to switch it to approved. Or if I want to change every entry, I can use the global change buttons up here to make everything be denied or put them back to requests. Nothing happens until you actually hit save, so don't panic if you hit one of those buttons by accident and change all your entries to something you didn't mean to. That's okay. Just tell it to search again, and that'll bring everything back to the way that it was. Now, this is a great screen for finding those day off entries, especially maybe requests that have not been approved yet. But as far as patrol people and anyone who kind of deals with a minimum staffing level, a lot of those people don't use this to actually approve the days off because I might need some more information. I can't just say yes based on the fact that you're requesting the day off and you have enough time. I probably need to see what else is going on that day. Do I have other people off? Is anybody out for training? So I may be better off going to the actual day to approve their time off entries. But this is here if it's useful for you. Maybe you have some people in your department that don't fall under a minimum staffing level, and you can just approve them from here. Or it's a great way to find those requests. Maybe I find that there's 3 out there, and I can just make note of the dates. And then I can go back to my daily schedule, see what else is going on, and choose to approve or deny them right from here. Change time off, which I just clicked, can be used to change anything about a day off entry, not just the status, but if I had to change the reason, I could do that, or add to the comments. I can do that. I can also get rid of a day off entry by clicking on it and hitting delete time off. Maybe the person decided that they were not going to use a vacation day that day, or their kid was sick, but they found somebody to sit home with them, so they don't need to take the day off anymore. If I click on the day and I go to delete time off, are you sure you want to remove this time off record? I can choose to remove or cancel. If I remove it, it will take it off the schedule, and it will also automatically put that time back into that person's bank if it was an approved day off. So I don't have to worry about making sure that time gets back in there. The system will handle that automatically. Okay. So those are the couple of scenarios that you would have for time off, either putting someone on time off who could not submit a request of their own, or approving a time off request that might have been submitted by the user, and then finally editing or deleting a time off entry that has to be changed or removed. Does anybody have any questions about how a supervisor can deal with those time off scenarios? Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead, we'll move on then to our next topic, which is going to be overtime. So perhaps after we make a day off entry here, maybe we now need to fill that spot with some overtime. So again, the first scenario that we'll discuss is a situation where I need to put somebody on overtime. So maybe we're short this next shift because somebody's on time off now. So I'm going to find someone to work overtime. I'm going to find them outside of our system, you know, not using replacement policy or open shifts, which will all come down the line. But let's just say that we have an existing method that I use to find somebody. Maybe I just look at the people who are working the shift before and I say, hey, can somebody stay and cover the first half of this shift? Or, you know, whatever the scenario is, you have an existing call list or an existing method that you use to find somebody who's going to work the overtime. And now you just want to put them on the schedule. So that way, number one, when this supervisor comes in, they realize that the hole in their schedule has been filled. So they don't need to run around trying to find somebody to come in. And number two, if you're dealing with payroll in your system, you want to make sure that that employee gets paid properly. So to enter an overtime entry for an employee, I can just click on the shift that I want to add it to anywhere here. And actually, let me just go back one step here. Let's go ahead and say that maybe Diane Jordan is going to cover 6 hours of this next shift. So I click on the shift here. I go to schedule overtime. And then I'm going to fill out this form. I'm going to pick Diane Jordan's name. The date and the shift are already filled out based on where we clicked. And then I can choose a reason. The reason for this overtime, in this case, is staffing shortage. Then I have an option for pay type. How does that employee want to get paid? Now, the options you have available for pay type will vary depending on the reason you select up here. So in this case, we have the option of time and a half cash and time and a half time. I'll choose cash. And then we can enter the start and end times. So she's going to work the night shift starting at 1900. And maybe going to 0200. Okay. This hours field will auto-calculate when we save our entry. It'll figure out what the difference is between these hours here. So I don't have to do the math. I can just leave it blank like it says here. And then we have status. Again, in this scenario, I'm a supervisor, and I have already approved this overtime. I've asked the person to work it. So I can just skip right to the approved status. And then there's a space there for comments. I can go in there and I can enter maybe a note about why the person's working overtime, whether I want to include who they're covering for or whatever it might be. Again, this box is checked. I can leave it that way, so that way it will send emails to the people that we set up to receive those emails, which usually includes at least the employee themselves getting a confirmation. And then we hit save. And you'll see that has added that employee's name there, highlighted in black, which is the color that was chosen for overtime here. And this indicates that it was for staffing shortage and the hours that they're going to work. So that's how I can assign someone to an overtime. Okay, the other scenario that might happen is maybe somebody had to work an overtime that was unplanned or unexpected, like a late call at the end of their shift, or they had to write some reports or something like that and couldn't go home on time. Or maybe they had to go to court on their day off and they need to submit a slip saying that they worked overtime and indicating how they want to be paid for it. We don't need to do this for anything that you've already scheduled for them. This is only stuff that maybe we don't know about ahead of time. So, for example, maybe I come in today and I have an email in my mailbox that says that Darren Coleman put in a request for overtime because he had to stay late yesterday on a late call. So we have late C, which is the code we used for late call, 19 to 20, and the question mark lets me know that it's requested. It hasn't been approved yet. So I can click on it, and I can, over here, go to change overtime. Again, this loads up everything that they submitted when they entered the request. So I can review that information, and then I can make the choice right here whether I want to approve with stipulation, or deny. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and approve it, leaving that box checked so that way they get the email saying that their overtime was approved. And then I'll hit save. And that's going to remove that question mark. So I now know that that is an approved overtime entry, and that would be ready for payroll if your department is using that. Now, with overtime requests, we do have, under the supervisor zone, access to manage overtime. So again, I can set a date range and I can search for any overtime items. I can use my filters here, and I can say, are there any requests out there that have not yet been approved? In this case, there are not, but I can change the status to all to see if I get any results back here. And I do. Just like with time off, I have the employee's name, date, shift, reason, start time, end time, number of hours. And I could approve them from here using either the drop-down, going one at a time, or again, using the buttons to change everything all at once. Departments may use this a little more often to approve overtime than they would use manage time off to approve time off, because it depends less on, you know, who else was working that day and so on. I can just take a look, and if I can confirm that the person had that overtime, I can just go ahead and approve it right from here and hit save at the bottom. And finally, with overtime, just like with time off, if I click on an entry, I can use that change overtime to change anything, not just the status, but pay type, hours, reason code, and so on. And I also have an option here for delete overtime. If it was entered by accident, or if I put the wrong person on and I had to delete it, or the person who was going to be out said they could make it in, so now I no longer need the overtime, I just click on it and I hit delete overtime. And it will ask, are you sure you want to remove this overtime entry? And our options are to remove or cancel. So I'll go ahead and remove it and take it off of our schedule. Okay, so that covers the different scenarios that a supervisor might have as far as overtime goes. Assigning an employee to overtime, through whatever means we decide who's going to get it. We just want to put them on the schedule and assign it to them. We also can go in and approve an overtime request that might be submitted by an employee, either one at a time or in bulk using manage overtime requests. And finally, how we can edit an overtime entry or delete one if we no longer need it. Okay, does anybody have any questions about how supervisors would interact with overtime in those scenarios? Okay. The next couple of items we're going to look at deal with what we call switches, substitutions, or reciprocates. So these are scenarios where employees are going to work for each other. Now, for some departments, they can use request switch and let the employees submit a switch request that can then be approved by a supervisor. If your department is using that feature, and maybe I've gone and received an email saying that there's a switch request that needs to be approved, or maybe I just want to go in and check to see if there's anything to make sure I didn't miss it, I go under the Supervisor menu, and I go to Change Request Switch Status. And in here, I can set a date range that I want to look, and I hit Refresh. And I will see a list of any requests that are in the system in that date range. The status, the first person's name, the date they were supposed to work, and the shift. The second person's name, the date they were supposed to work, and the shift. And who submitted the request. If it was a substitute instead of a switch, you would only see the first person's name, date, and shift, and who's going to work for them, and the start and end times, because that's a more open-ended process, so we don't know when the other person's going to pay them back yet. If I want more information on this item, I hit the blue arrow here, and I'll be able to see a little more data. And I'll also have my options to either approve the switch request, deny it, or delete it if maybe it was entered by mistake. Okay, got a question here. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, is the affected supervisor notified upon the request, or do they have to keep mining for this data every day?
as far as the switches go, or the switch request, I should say, when it's put in for the 2 employees, it's going to notify both employees and also the supervisors based on the employees group. So the same people who would get an email if they requested a day off or an overtime entry will receive the email for a switch request as well.
Okay, and is it only one supervisor can approve it, or can we set it up for both the supervisors have to approve it?
Either one can. We don't have like a 2-step process. It's just a 1-step process. So either one could go in and approve it, and if they did, it would go on the schedule as an approved switch. If your department's going to require them to kind of discuss before one of them goes in and does it, they would have to discuss it outside of the system.
Understood. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so if I go ahead and say I'm going to approve this switch, I can hit approve. Switch request has been approved, and you'll see the status changes right here. That's going to email those employees, letting them know that their switch was approved. And we'll also be able to see it start to show on the schedule. So here's who's working that day, and then in parentheses, who they're working for. In this case, we just did day shift for night shift, but this, of course, could be on different days as well. If your department is not using the screen where employees can request a switch or a substitution, either because you have to use the Reciprocate option for the way your department does business and for payroll and so on, or because you just don't want them submitting the request, you want them to go directly to a supervisor. Or maybe it's a scenario where the employees just can't get to a computer to submit the request. They're just coming to you and asking you, and you just want to put it in for them. You can enter a switch or a substitute or a reciprocate by clicking on a person's name here and going to substitute, switch, or reciprocate. There's a couple options here. Again, depending on your department's rules and your payroll needs, that will really dictate which of these you use. Reciprocate, which is an official schedule change where we actually change the hours that people work. Or switch, which is not an official schedule change, and we don't actually change the person's hours. We just make a note of who's working for who. Substitute is just like switch. It's not an official schedule change, but it's open-ended. So we would say that Diane was supposed to work today in this shift, and then we would pick someone who's going to work for her with the understanding that she will pay that person back later on down the line, and that'll be kind of between those two to work it out when they pay each other back. The last one, which is probably the least commonly used, it would be a substitute for time. So that would say, I'm going to work for you today, but instead of you paying me back, you're just going to give me some time in my bank from your bank. So you're going to give me some of your comp time or something like that to make up for it. It's probably the least commonly used one. Okay, so to use any of these, whichever one pertains to my department, I just follow the instructions here. The first employee will already be filled out. That's the person that I clicked on. And then I would choose another employee that they were going to switch with. and I would choose, let's find somebody here. And I would find the day that they're working. And then I would just go ahead and hit save, and that would place that switch on the schedule. Again, just to reiterate, switch and reciprocate, they're close-ended. We need both parts of it right now. We need to know Diane's working today, or was working today, day shift. Darren was working the 10th day shift. They're going to cover for each other. Substitute is more open-ended. Diane was supposed to work today. Darren's going to cover for her, for the whole shift or part of the shift, and then she'll pay Darren back sometime down the line when they decide it's the right time. Regardless, once you've filled out the items, down at the bottom right-hand corner is where you would click the Save button. And that will process that and put that on the schedule. Okay. Any questions about either approving a requested switch or just going in and entering a switch, a substitute, or a reciprocate for employees? Okay, got a question? Yep, go ahead, Greg.
So I tried to do that switch, and I got dates must be in the same payroll period. Is there a way to override that?
Yeah, so there's a setting in your company profile where you can identify whether your dates have to be in the same pay period. So for some departments, they say a switch has to be within the same pay period just so that way the hours kind of balance out. So if that is the case for your department, then you will get that error until you have entered your pay periods in there. Once the pay periods are in there, then it will know what a pay period is for you, and it'll allow you to do it as long as it's within the pay period. If you have no restriction on a switch or a reciprocate, then you can change that to be 0. And then the other option you have is if you put a digit in there, then that's going to indicate how far apart the switch could be. So if I don't want you to be able to say, well, I'll work for you today and you work for me in December, I might want to say, well, they have to be kind of within like a month. I don't want it going any further out than that. You can put a digit in there other than 0, and then it will kind of lock those that span to a certain amount. That can be done through the desktop. Actually, I think it might be in the web too if you're in as an administrator. If you go under the, I guess it's the administration menu, and I think it's company profile or application control maybe. That's where you can do that. Once we finish the supervisor items, if you just remind me, I'll bring up the screen. I'll show you exactly where you can do it.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so moving on from switches and substitutions and reciprocates. Just a couple of odds and ends to clean up, or to go over, I should say, in the Schedule Actions menu. If I click on someone's name, I will have an option to add comments. This will let me put a comment or a note next to someone's name on the schedule. So this could be anything, you know, something that the employee is doing that day, something that needs to be remembered that day, anything along those lines. So maybe this employee is going to have POS training from 0800 to 0900 or something like that. Or, you know, this employee is going to be doing, you know, a DARE thing. At, you know, noon. So anything along those lines that you might want to add to your schedule, you can type there, and then you can hit save. And those will show in the details section for that shift and that day. These items can be seen by anybody who has access to the daily schedule view. So, you know, any employees that access the daily schedule, whether it's through the web or the desktop application. If I need to remove any of these items, I can click again, and I can go back to add comments, and I can just delete them or edit them as needed and hit save. Okay. Another item that we have available here is called Move Employee. So if I needed to take one employee and maybe move them to a different shift, so maybe we're short on night shift, so we're going to have somebody who's scheduled for day shift, instead of working day shift, come in on night shift. Or maybe we need to adjust the day that they're working. Maybe somebody was scheduled to be working today, and they're scheduled to be off on Saturday, but we need them to come in on Saturday, so we're going to give them off today. Those are the types of things I can do with Move Employee. I click on the employee's name, and I go to Move Employee. And this says this employee was scheduled to work 7/7 on patrol day shift. And then I indicate the day and the shift that I want to move them to. So if I want to stay on the same day and go to night shift, I can do that. And that will move them from one shift to the other. Okay, or maybe I need her to come in tomorrow instead of today. So I can click and I can do Move Employee. And I can say, okay, Diane, instead of coming in on the 7th, we need you to come in on the 8th on day shift. And then if we go back to our schedule and we look at tomorrow's date, we'll see that Diane has moved there. Okay, so that's a tool that is handy for adjusting people's schedules. And the last item to show you is something called View Entry, which just lets you get a little more information about an entry on the schedule. So if I click on a regular work day, or a person who's just working a regular day, and I do View Entry, it's kind of boring, just kind of gives you the information about their day, what shift they're on, the date, the times, and so on. But if I click on somebody who has some other things going on, maybe a time off entry or an overtime entry, then when I do view entry, I can see both their workday and their day off entry. And I can see things such as the date and timestamps. So I can see when the day off was requested and by who, when it was approved and by who. If it was an overtime entry, I could see things like the payment type. I can also see different reason text that might have been entered on a day off or an overtime entry. Okay. So those are just the last couple odds and ends as far as schedule actions go. Adding comments, moving an employee, and viewing an entry. Does anybody have any questions about any of those? Okay, very good. The last few items to show you are under the reports menu. We have a handful of reports that are available in here. And it is possible that these may vary depending on how security is set up for your department. But they all pretty much work the same. You know, some of the most common ones are things like the overtime activity report, or the balance of time off report, or the time off activity report. And they all, for the most part, as I said, work in a similar fashion. If I wanted to do an overtime activity report, I click on that report. I come in here, I identify my date range. I choose my employees. And then I can choose what reasons I want to see, what overtime reasons. And then some reports have additional filters. In this case, I can filter by pay type or by CFS or reference number if I'm using those. And when I hit search, I'm going to get all that information to show up in our report. The group the employee's in, their name, the reason for the overtime, the date, the shift, the rate, time and a half, straight, double time, number of hours, pay type, status, any comments that might be entered. Time off activity report works pretty much the same way. Okay. I have a image over here, which I can view as a pie chart or as a bar graph. I can save that image if I like, using the Save button here. Or if I don't want to see it right now, I can use the arrow to minimize it. The report part can be saved as a PDF or exported to Excel if need be. And again, that's pretty much how all of these reports work. The one exception being the employee statistical report. This one's just a hair different. I just choose one employee at a time from the list up here. I can choose a start and end date. So if I only want to run it for a certain period of time, I can. And this report compiles a lot of information for the chosen employee all into one report. So I'm going to see things like time balances, how much was given, how much was used, what the balance is. I'll see time off activity, any time off entries that are entered into the system for that date range. Overtime activity, any overtime items that have been entered into the system for that date range. Administrative days log. This is going to be any time that's been added to or subtracted from the employee's bank. So when you enter your starting balances, when they earn time from working comp or overtime that pays in comp, when they get their allotments every year or month or week or however often you give them their time. Those items will show up there so they can see that it's going into their bank. Work trends, what days do they tend to work, what days do they tend to take off, what days do they tend to work overtime. Schools, any school or training assignments that have been entered through our training module will show here. The name of the school, the dates, if there was a certification associated with it. Extra duty, if you are entering outside jobs through our extra duty module, you'll see any jobs that they worked or are scheduled to work, the date, the vendor, the description, the location, start time, end time, number of hours, hourly pay, and status. And then court, if you're using our court alert module, that'll show any subpoena information that was entered. And finally, time sellback. If you have any scenario where an employee might sell back some of their time that they've earned, you would see that there, the type of time they sold back, how much, when it was processed, and by who. So that's a little bit different of a report there. It works just a little bit differently, but it's a great place to get a lot of information all in one spot. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the reports, what's available, how they can be run? Okay. Last thing I'll point out here is there's the help and training option over here. This opens up a new tab in your web browser and brings you right to our support portal. So if there's ever anything that you need help on, you might be able to find the information here. If I want to remember how to use manage time off, I can either search for it, find manage time off, and I can view an article on how to use that screen. Or I can even just look and search or browse by different topics that are available here. We have articles available in there. We have some videos available in there. So if you need help with anything, if you're stuck on something, you may be able to find the information here, kind of a step-by-step walkthrough. Because it is a separate tab, you can keep switching back and forth between the article or the video as you go along. And once you're done, you can just close the web portal tab and you're right back where you left off on the web page. Okay. So that covers all of the supervisor items that we wanted to talk about today. I will, after we're done here, take a second to go back and show you where you can change that restriction on your switches or reciprocates. But before I do, I just want to close out this part of the session by stopping for any questions on anything that we've covered today, any supervisory functions that we've looked at, or any questions you have about how a supervisor might do a certain task that they may have to do on a regular basis. Okay. So there's no questions on this then. I'm going to quickly sign out. And I'm going to log in as an admin. And I can show you that under the Setup menu, and I believe it's under Site Content. Right here is where you can adjust that limitation. So where it says Reciprocate Restriction, if it says PP there, that is locked to pay period. But as I mentioned before, if you switch it to be 0, then there's no restriction. And if you switch it to any other non-zero digit, then that means that the 2 parts of the switch or the reciprocate can only be that far apart. So in other words, if you put 30 days, then I can work for you today, and you can work for me up to 30 days from now. But if it was 40 days from now, it would say, no, you can't process this because it's too far apart. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Your mic's live.
So I kind of figured that out while you were doing that. So I did that. And I tried to do the switch. Then it said my officers didn't have a matching skill set, and I have everyone set to the same thing. I thought. I'm trying to do like a very basic setup. So.
Yeah. So that's going to look, and it's going to make sure that. Can we do that from here yet? Hold on 1 second. So that's going to check to make sure that both employees have under application have the same skill set marked here. Ours is just kind of generic right now. But so if you had like patrol and sergeant or something like that, or patrol and OIC, if I was marked as a sergeant and the other person was marked as just patrol, then it wouldn't let us do a switch because we don't have matching skill sets. Or if one person was patrol and the other person was communications, or one was patrol and the other one didn't have anything, that type of thing would it would check for that as well. So for both those employees, you just want to check and verify that they both have at least one skill set in common.
Huh, okay. So how did that skill set 2, 3, 1, how did those get clicked? Because I guess on the person I was using, they had a skill 2 and 3 clicked, and I don't even know what those are.
Yeah, so I mean, this is very generic here. I'm just trying to remember. Okay, so because we've been adding these screens to the web, I'm not sure what's available and what's not. So when we go under validation and coverage skill sets, this all ties back to minimum staffing levels. So if you're setting up minimum staffing levels, and actually what, let's see, hold on 1 second. Okay, so what I actually think is happening here is it's just not reading the skills from the label translation on the web right now. It may just be something I have to have them adjust. I'm going to bring over the main program here just to show you, or the desktop application, I should say. So when you go into validation and coverage skill sets, and you set this up as desk, patrol, OIC, whatever you might use, when you go into the employee profile, it reads those labels, and it translate them instead of just generic things into what you're actually using. It just, like I said, seems like it's not doing that on the web at the moment, so I'll have to have them take a look at that. But if you look at it through the desktop, it may make a little more sense where, I don't know how you have yours set up, but if you have, like, again, patrol and sergeant, and one of them is marked with sergeant and the other one's marked with patrol, it's not going to let that go through.
Okay.
If you have your different kind of skills set up here, but people aren't marked at all, there's a screen you can use under validation. It's called Employee Validation Skill Sets. And instead of going one person at a time and checking, you can select everybody, and then you can kind of see who is marked as what. And you can actually update it from here by just checking or unchecking as need be and hitting apply up at the top.
All right, that's probably what I'm going to need to do. Okay, I see it now.
So, yeah, I mean, it's probably a quick way to just verify that people are have the right thing, the right skills, and then update them if they're not.
Okay.
But once those are set,
yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, once those are set, the switch or substitution does check that in an attempt to make sure that we don't have somebody switching with someone who kind of can't perform the same type of functions.
Okay. It's just we're right here. Do you have time to? I am totally confused on how you set up the minimum staffing on a shift. Is that something complicated?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me just end this recording here, and we can take a look at that.